Hello there. Good afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world. Maybe it's nighttime. How are you? Today, I wanted to chat with you a little bit about the thoughts that you have about money and where do they come from. A lot of times, when we are looking at trying to make shifts in our financial life, sometimes we've got these sometimes they're subliminal thoughts or thoughts that maybe you're even aware of them, but you're thinking that maybe you need to sort of shift your mindset around the way that you think about money. And so I wanted to talk today really briefly about where do these thoughts come from. Sometimes they are really subliminal messages that we've sort of picked up on just by powers of observation, or maybe they're very overt. And what I mean, I'll give a couple of examples. So, an overt example would be if you heard people in your life say that all people with money are bad, or rich people are greedy, or something like that. That would be a very overt message. If you have one particular family member or distant cousin who's really well off, and maybe the rest of the family isn't as well off, then they say negative things about oh, look at this guy over here, like he's a show off, or whatever. So those are overt messages that you may have heard, and then you sort of those things sink into your psyche, and that may prevent you from wanting to have financial success because you don't want to be criticized by the people that you love, your own family, your own friends, that kind of thing. So the way that these messages can kind of sabotage us from moving forward in life, it's really important to recognize them. Something that I would call more of a subliminal message is, well, now that I'm trying to think of an example, it's not even coming to me off the top of my head. But sometimes there's messages that you've just observed by watching someone. So, let's say, for example, that you had, a mom who didn't trust banking systems. And so whenever she would get paid, it would be in cash, and she would just shove it under the mattress, right? Or stick it in a shoebox in the top of the closet. And those are the kind of things where then you're starting to observe a lack of trust around financial systems. So that would be more of a subliminal message. So here is an exercise that I would love for you to work through so that you can kind of understand, what kind of things you have picked up on or observed or heard about money throughout your life. And then we'll talk about how to challenge those thoughts too. So this interesting exercise, you can kind of make it as broad of scope as you want, or you can kind of keep it narrow. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about just your immediate family or influences. And so, if you are, from a home that had mother, father, siblings, or maybe even grandparents, all in one home, just, on paper, jot down just circles, squares, triangles, names. I don't care how you distinguish who was who, but I want you to sort of associate who were the important people in your life. And then we're going to do this exercise for all of these different people, but we're going to think about who they were with money and how money flowed, right? So if you had, I, for example, came from a home that had a stay-at-home mom and my dad was the income earner. So, I would associate him as being the person who brought the money in. And as far as spending goes, I don't know. I think that I just only ever observed my mom spending the money because she was the one that took us to the grocery store or to go get, school supplies and clothes and those kind of things. I didn't necessarily go do spending activities with my dad, although, I know that he obviously spent money too. And I really don't even know between the two of them, who did most of the bill paying. I would venture a guess that it might have been my dad because he had a lot of, little like binder clips and like reminders and payment coupon books. I remember we like all had braces, and he had like a little coupon book of like the payments that needed to be made for that. So I would venture a guess that he probably paid the bills, where my mom did more of like the discretionary shopping, I think is what I would call that. But then, we start to associate like who made the money, who spent the money, and then did they give you any messages about money? So this is where I want you to kind of think about, did they say things to you about money, or did they try to hide things from you about money? And just sort of like write these things down, think about them. Just, it's almost like a journaling exercise, but I want it to be just like a little bit more fun and kind of graphic in nature. And then I want you to think about like your surrounding community members. So if you had like a very close relationship with like the church, or certain people like that, or if you were maybe like in a boys and girls club and, you had like mentors, whoever was in like your general vicinity, maybe it's like your parents' friends or your friends' parents, anything like that, people that you felt really close to. I want you to think about like, did you observe anything there as it relates to who earned money, who spent money, things they said about money, feelings that they had about money? And this could be a good example here, I think, would be if you have a very frugal family where maybe you didn't have a lot growing up, or, maybe there was money in the family, but it wasn't spent very frivolously, where maybe you've got a friend who frequently was like, always being bought like really nice things, and, had whatever he or she wanted, like whenever they wanted it. They went on big vacations, all those kind of things. I want you to think about the people who were really close to you and what kind of messages you picked up on or heard, and just sort of take notes of those things. And then you can kind of open it up into more like distant family members. I do recall having, I suppose this person would be a cousin, but their age gap would have been like 40 years difference between me and him. But I do recall hearing about like one person in the family that was like really, really well off. Like I think he owned a lot of like restaurants or something like that. Someone I've never met. But I know that person like existed. So I heard things about that. Never heard anything about him being bad or good. It just was what it was. Like he was like kind of one of the really successful like entrepreneurial businessmen. But again, it wasn't somebody that I knew. But I want you to like really think about all those kinds of things. Okay, so that exercise might take you a while, but I want you to just kind of think about like all of the different things that you observed or thought or heard about money as it relates to like your core family unit, and then expand from there. And I would say expand as much as possible, to anybody that you feel like you've learned something from or felt something from as it relates to money. And then after you do that, you don't have to do this all in one sitting because this could be like a big exercise. But then after you do that, what I want you to do is I want you to think about like any of the money messages that you've heard. And I want you to think about whether or not you feel like that's serving you well. Like, is that helping you or hurting you in your own financial goals and your own progress too? And then let's say it's something bad. So let's say that you're one of those people who believes that like people who are wealthy are all terrible people. What I want you to do is I want you to challenge yourself and see, can I come up with any scenario at all, any example where that's not true? And that is where it may get a little bit hard, because if you can find like one example of someone who has a lot of money that is not a terrible person, that's one example. But now let's maybe dig into a second, and then a third, and then a fourth. And this is a lot of work. This is a lot of like super deep work, and it doesn't happen overnight. But eventually, we'll start to kind of like think about and talk about how these kind of thoughts are maybe like stopping you from living your best life, or progressing towards your financial goals, because they're kind of like stopping you from like, I don't want to be wealthy because wealthy people are terrible, right? So like, these are the kind of thoughts, and I want you to prove to yourself that you can come up with examples where that's not true. And then we might be able to start to like shift that dynamic. Okay. So, great to see you on here live again, John. Thanks so much for joining. All right, so that's a hefty exercise. Let me know when you're doing it, if you maybe felt stuck or maybe didn't have any kind of connections, because that might be possible too. I know that like I grew up in a family where we didn't really talk about money at all, so I didn't hear like a lot of positive messages or negative messages, which I suppose just left me up to my own to, sort of like create my own stories around money. And I would say that's probably a good thing. But I know that I definitely like screwed up a lot. So maybe I could have stood to have learned just a little bit more, so I didn't have to learn everything the hard way. But anyway, I would love to hear, if you go through this exercise, what kind of things did you uncover? Did you discover anything that was maybe a surprise to you that you didn't know you were going to find? Type into the comments. I would love to hear after you do the exercise, like anything that came up for you. I'd love to hear about it or chat about it further. So that's your assignment for today. I want you to do a little bit of like homework, do some drawing, some journaling, like write this stuff out, and let's see what you come up with. All right. Take care. I hope you have a fantastic day today. Bye.